Hi everyone, this is the continuation of Deadlock. Under Deadlock, we are seeing resource allocation graph. We have already seen what is a resource allocation graph and how to construct an resource allocation graph and how to get information about the current execution state of the system from an resource allocation graph. Now let's see how we can detect the occurrence of deadlock from an resource allocation graph. Okay, this is nothing but when cycle forms on this resource allocation graph, then we can say there is an occurrence of deadlock. Here see, in this the process P1 goes for request for R1. R1 is held by P2 and P2 is requesting for R3, whereas R3 is held by P3 and P3 is requesting for R2. In such way, R2 is already held by P1. So here an entire loop cycle forms, right? In this situation, if a cycle getting formed, then obviously there will be an deadlock. If there is no cycle, there will be a situation where deadlock can't get occurred. Okay, in this is the one cycle and another pathway is here. It is of see here. In this, the process P2 is requesting for R3 and R3 is held by P3 and P3 is requesting for R2, whereas R2 is getting held by P2. So there is also a cycle formation. So in this graph we can get analyzed that there are two cycles getting formed. So if these two cycle process request is getting granted and in this sequence if the system gets executed, for sure the deadlock will occur on that system. This is an example of a RAG graph with a cycle, but there is less possibility of deadlock, or else let's say it as there is no deadlock even though cycle is getting formed. In this, let us see here the process P1 is requesting for R1 and R1 is held by P3. P3 is requesting for R2, whereas R2 is getting held by P1. Here cycle formation is there. But even though I am saying here there is no occurrence of deadlock, can you guess why it is? Because the in between process which was because the in between resources which was allocated in this entire process is not of single instances. Here R1 is of 2 instances and R2 is of 2 instance resources. So in a for a say, let us say the P1 is requesting for an instance of R1, okay, and let us say it is being granted. For example, first instance of R1 is getting allocated for process P1. At the same time, the second instance of R1 is getting allocated for the process P3. In the same situation, the process P3, which is already holding the resource instance of R2, right? Let us say first instance of resource R2 is getting holded by the process P3. At the same time, if process P1 is getting holded by the second instance of resource R2, then there is no interlinking of that resource instances, right? So all requests of the process resources can be allocated simultaneously without any clash. In that situation, we can avoid the occurrence of deadlock. So if the even though the graph RAG graph which is allocated for the process and resource contains a cycle, but there is no formation of cycle, we can say it as no deadlock state, or else even though if cycle forms, the resources which was interlinked is consisting of more than one instances, then we can say the graph which is allocated for the process is deadlock free. These are the two scenarios we get from RAG graph.